You guys ever watch any of those fail videos? You know, the ones where it shows somebody trying to do something like jumping off of a rope swing, or, a cat trying to jump onto a cabinet, and they just mess up. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't ever want to see anyone seriously injured, but I'll admit, seeing other people failing can be super entertaining. As a matter of fact, we have a TV show called America's Funniest Home Videos, where for decades now, we've watched people do stupid stuff and laughed at it. And when I see videos like this, I notice that they all usually have something in common. The person in the video who is failing is never alone. They're almost always surrounded by their friends, and their friends have probably bet them or dared them or thought it would be funny to see them try to do this thing, and then they ended up failing. And you know what? Chances are, you and I have probably done something ridiculous, funny, uncomfortable, or completely unlike what we would normally do because of the friends that we were hanging around. And this isn't a high school thing or a teenager thing, it's just a human thing. When we get together, we like to, hag each other on and see how far we can take it. It's crazy how powerful of an effect we can have on each other. And that's why last week, when we began this series called The You Effect, we talked about how all of us have more of an effect on others than we actually think that we do. And because of that, God can do more than we can ever imagine with the influence that we have. And even if we know we have an effect or an impact on others, it can be hard to believe that that effect is important or world-changing. But it can be, especially when it comes to that small group of friends that you have. And that's what I want to talk about this week. You see, there's a book in the New Testament of the Bible called Acts. And believe it or not, each of us has been affected by the events of this book. Acts recorded the actions of the first followers of Jesus, how their decisions changed everything throughout the Roman Empire and throughout all of history. If you've ever heard of a church before, that's because of what happened in the book of Acts. And there's a powerful moment that happens when the early followers of Jesus are gathered together, and it's called Pentecost. And what happens is the Spirit of God shows up in what was described as a violent wind, and people began worshiping God in a big way. And the people who witnessed this were confused. They didn't really understand what had happened, until Peter, one of Jesus' followers, stood up and explained what was going on. You see, Peter preached a powerful message about who Jesus was and what Jesus was about, and then this wind came. So this fisherman named Peter, this average guy who messed up all the time, stood up and preached, and it had a massive effect. People started turning to God and wanting to know more about Him. But what's interesting is what happens next. These new followers of Jesus, they didn't just walk away. They didn't tell Peter, hey, great sermon, I'll see you next week, and then go back to minding their own business. No, they put what they had heard in that moment into action, into that small group of friends and the people that were closest to them, and they put it into action immediately. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47 say this: They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together, and they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had a need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. What's crazy here is that when they started to follow Jesus, it wasn't just a time once a week, maybe twice a week, that they got together, but instead these verses say that they got together daily. They decided to use their influence with one another to continue to build this relationship with God. And more than that, it said that the Lord started to add to their number daily. More and more people began to follow Jesus because of these Jesus followers. These people made up the early church. They were living their lives as people who had heard about Jesus and were changed by Him. So what did they do that was so different? Well, what was so big that led them to this change is the world had become and credited the people who had started the church as we know it. These people just started living their lives together with a common goal in mind, and that common goal was loving Jesus. The history from the book of Acts tells us they shared, they gave to each other, met together, ate together. If one person was in need, they sold the things that they had to give to that person. In other words, they were with each other and they were for each other. The things they did were behaviors, but they were based in their character and their shared mission and something they believed in. They were changed people who were transformed by the love of Jesus. Something big happened in their lives that influenced each of them. But it was the small steps that they then took that gave them influence. You see, these people started a movement that has influenced millions for over 2,000 years. You and I know about the church because of these people in the book of Acts. They went home and they retold the stories, and then those people went out and told stories, and all of these small groups of friends and small groups of people continued to meet and tell the story of Jesus until it went from being a handful of people in a square at Pentecost to millions of people across the world who now know the story of Jesus. And sure, sometimes there will be one person who, like Peter, preaches and changes thousands of lives, and when that happens, it's great. But more often, movements that change the world are started by small groups of people, with each other and for each other committed to doing something important. Because having a big effect starts with a small group. And sure, the violent wind and the sermon from Peter kickstarted the whole movement that is now organized into churches and student ministries like ours, but the early church continued to grow. Jesus' message continued to spread because of individuals. Because people, just one person, decided that they were going to look out for the other person and that they were going to work together. And that's what the early church was built on. So despite the natural fear that we sometimes have as to, should I talk to someone about Jesus? Should I be using my influence to tell people about this story? They decided that the message was bigger than the fear they experienced. And having a big effect starts with a small group. It starts with circling up with a few people around you and deciding to do life a little differently. And that's why we've been doing small groups here, by the way, because we think it's so important. We want you to have a group that is so noticeably different, so obviously for each other and with each other, that the people around you want to know what's going on. They see you in these groups and they say, why do those people love each other so much? Why do they have so much fun when they're together? And then when they ask us that question, we can invite them to be a part of that group. We can keep making small groups. Your friend circle, their friend circle. Everybody can start to influence their own small group with this story of who Jesus was and what Jesus did. And ultimately, here's the truth. You have an effect on the people around you. But you will have a far bigger effect and a far longer lasting effect if you aren't by yourself. If there are other people around you who are believing the same thing and doing the same thing. But there's a catch. None of this happens if you don't show up. If you don't make a habit of consistently showing up to your small group, whether it's a small group at church or showing up for your friends when they need you, it also doesn't happen unless you stand out. Unless you're brave enough to say, this is what I believe, and I want to talk about it. I want to let you know this story of Jesus. I want to let you know who this God is that I serve. And unless you start something. And for some of us, it seems really scary to start something because it sounds like I'm saying that you need to start your own small group, but instead, maybe it just needs to be a habit that you change. Maybe you need to make a habit of saying hello to people more often, or make a habit of talking to people you don't normally talk to more often. But when we do this, people start to hang out together. And when people start to hang out together and then we intentionally serve each other, we have a different kind of relationship. They have a deeper kind of friendship. They have a better kind of experience. And they have a far bigger effect than they would have imagined on their own. So my challenge to you guys this week during all this craziness is reach out to your small group, your church small group, the people. Just sit down and think, who are the people that I would normally eat lunch with at school? Who are the people that I would normally hang out with in between the class changes? And then reach out to those people. Love them, serve them, ask them if there's anything that you can do for them. Remind them of this story. If they're Christians, then ask them to talk about this story a little bit. If they're not, ask them if they would like to hear the story. Because small groups of people can change the entire world.